John Ratson with Accenture, and I lead our data and AI capabilities across the US. I also lead some of our large banking relationships.
Hey everybody, my name is Damian Hess. I am with Amazon Web Services. I am a solutions architect working in media and entertainment, but focusing on digital publishing.
Hi everyone, my name is Heather Edwards. I am at the Associated Press, and I lead the team responsible for content metadata and data science solutions.
And finally, I'm Drew Winchowski. I'm part of the Progress MarkLogic team and going to be your moderator today. Jumping into things, could we talk a little bit perhaps on how AI is being leveraged now in content creation and what you're seeing out in the industry with the new tools that are available? Heather, would you like to start?
So at AP, we've really focused on using AI to improve, to take away some of the repetitive tasks that our journalists have to do, particularly around metadata creation, so that they can focus on doing journalism and doing what they're best at. And so specifically, we've launched tools that help suggest headline ideas to our editors, help them to summarize news stories, which is quite different from summarizing other types of content, turns out. And to create shot lists or video that help our customers understand what's in the video and identify the parts that they want to use. We've also launched tools recently that support translation and help our teams that are translating content from English into Spanish and Portuguese get more content out to those customers faster. And then we've really focused on quality and on how we can make sure that those tasks are really delivering value for our users by being reliable. AP standards require every single piece of generated content to be reviewed by an editor. We never publish anything directly that hasn't been reviewed by a human. But that means that in order to bring value to those humans and accelerate their work, the quality has to be really consistent. And so we found that really focusing on fine-tuning and on delivering task-specific models enables our users to get their content out faster.
Thanks for that. Damien, a little bit of how AWS is joining in on the content creation side.
Right. Well, obviously, AWS has been offering generative AI services, AI/ML, for quite some time now. Very flexible way of utilizing generative AI by being able through Amazon Bedrock to select different models. But what AWS has been doing has been working with a lot of publishers, especially in the education space, to use generative AI, like what you were saying, really for that editorial efficiency. Definitely generating things like question banks, things that are time consuming for the editors, but you can have the AI generate, and then the editors can go back and review and make sure that the content is correct and is doing what the intent is that they pedagogically they want to have the students learn. But we're also seeing its use in things like chatbots, but not just your dumb old, hey, how's my order kind of chatbot. But we're seeing, for example, Cengage has been doing this where they're building tutors for students, where it's not just giving the answer to the student, but will actually coach the student. We'll say, oh, you seem to have a question, with this sort of a topic area, because it understands the context of when the student triggers a question to the chatbot, and it'll say, what do you know about this topic? Do we need to kind of work on the definition? And when the student types in, well, I think that like macroeconomics is such and such, and it recognizes, oh, no, that's not quite right. It can say, oh, maybe you should read about, et cetera, and can refer the student to the content. So it is helping and tutoring and not just giving answers. So I think a lot of publishers are now trying to see, how can we make editorial workflows more efficient? How can we create better experiences for the user that's really tailored to what the user's needs are, who that persona is? And we're seeing some other interesting back office functions where Condé Nast was talking about this recently. They can actually do automated rights clearance for digital assets because they can just put all their contracts into a vector database but the contracts are usually coming in as PDFs, often with scribbles and people writing over them. And they're finding that the LLMs are really good at being able to read all of the text. You can put that into a vector database, and then you can just natural language queries. Natural language becomes legalese in the back end, can pull up matching contracts and their associated assets and present information back to the user. And the legal department is like, actually, this is highly accurate. We can accept this. So these are just some ways that we're seeing people leveraging generative AI in the publishing space.
Yeah, so at Accenture, we partner a lot with AWS, and our role sort of in the ecosystem is to actually build out these capabilities. So if you think of cloud, data, AI, and security, and then a really important one around responsible AI, which is something that I've studied a bit in terms of trust. So building out we think of it in terms of data, information, consumption of that information, and then can we do that in a responsible way in terms of fair, non-biased, et cetera. So one of the things that we see all over, and it's not necessarily going to be fixed with Gen AI or agentic in the short term, is there's data all over the place. How many of you guys have data swamps and where you're supposed to have data lakes, right? And so it's really important to get the data in a clean capacity where you have a clean taxonomy and ontology to understand that data, to then be able to provide APIs, provide proper access privileges to the right audiences with some techniques around RBACs, which is this role-backed access capability or access. And then moving forward, what we're looking at a lot is agentic capability. So just this notion of an agentic mindset in general, where you're looking at every single process through publishing, syndication, et cetera, where there's now automatic processes that literally can take the place of human fingers in some cases. And for example, one of the things we're working on with AWS in partnership is building out some software assets, more assets and accelerators on top of the core backbone stack that then are able to be agentic. So if you think of the Apple iStore, the App Store, and then moving forward, I think we're going to have, especially with AWS and Bedrock, there's going to be an agent marketplace, right? So you're going to have agent marketplace of all of the different capabilities, from orchestration agents to the utility agents, that will be able to download all of this in the with the goal of more productivity through the life cycle. So those are a few of the opening comments.
Actually, I would like to piggyback on one thing. You're already talking about the importance of responsible AI, and we are finding when we've talked to publishers, the tremendous concern is about, okay, how can I make sure that the responses being generated by the AI are accurate? That's of great importance to all publishers. Accuracy is number one. But also, how do we make sure that they're not biased, that they are not, slanted in some way that you don't want, or that it's not giving answers? This gets back to the idea of that AI tutor shouldn't just give the answers. How do we make sure it doesn't stray into topic areas? Might be correct, but you don't want the answer to be coming from the AI in that context for that user. And so that is really important. So however you are using generative AI, you want to be able to have a framework that gives you that sort of governance and control to set up guardrails. And also that's internally too, when a lot of people want to experiment with AI within an organization, but they're not sure, do I have permission to do it? What's my organization's policy on which AI tools that I can use? Can I get access to a sandbox where I can try different Gen AI or AI tools, right? So these are all really important things to think about for your organization and to work with a vendor. AWS offers many different ways of doing this. I know that you've been working on different frameworks and tools that can help organizations implement generative AI in a responsible way, in a controlled way. It's really important to think about all these things as an organization, I think.
Even though the three of you work in different verticals, there seems to be a kind of a common thread here is that, it's really important to protect your brand and ensure that what content you're putting out is of quality and trust, as you said. What are some ways that you're putting perhaps a human in the loop to validate what the systems are talking about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have editors review every single thing that is generated. AP never allows generative AI to author original content or create images, ever. That's not how we do news. And so we do always have humans in the loop. We also have a process, we have an innovation process where we go through a POC stage, a pilot stage where we go out to a larger group of editors with a tool and have them give us feedback on the quality that they're seeing and any specific issues that they're seeing. And at each stage of that process, we refine the solution, whether that's fine tuning or some other solution. We refine the solution to ensure that the end product really is of extremely high quality, extremely consistent, extremely reliable, speaking in AP voice, using AP style, before we go out to a large audience of editors. So throughout the process, we are setting those guardrails in place really as a set of gates. We have also used sort of the more typical guardrails concept in AI development, but our guardrails are more policy and process oriented. We did roll out a sandbox starting in 2023. We created a sandbox program where users who have, some skills in technology were able to get access to more generative models, but where we have a really clear AI policy that is written down, and everyone is very, very clear on what is in scope and what's out of scope, and we communicate among the sandbox community so that we have a Slack channel where we talk about what people are doing. People ask questions about whether or not something's okay or how they should move forward. And we also have monthly demos where we actually just had one this week, where folks talk about what they've been doing and share best practices among the team. So we really treat it as a community operation. We're very blessed to work in a very mission-driven organization that has really clear ethics and values. And so everything that we do is really guided by those standards and ethics. And I think it helps us because everyone is there for the mission and everyone wants to do the right thing. So we have a lot of confidence in each other.
Just one point in terms of the vertical that I focus on in financial services and banking, specifically capital markets, is the regulatory aspect, right? So all of the data that we're talking about is scrutinized by the regulators. And all the more important, we talked about explainability before. So what we're also seeing from the banks is now with third-party software even, and I'm sure you guys had a lot of this in terms of entering into the bank, this notion of AI embedded in the software. And so if it's not explainable, how do you actually let it in the four walls? And for example, you might have seen JP Morgan Chase just this week for their CISO issued a memorandum out just challenging all the third-party providers to really be able to disclose each part of their supply chain so that because with security threats, it could be embedded in a chip, for example. And we've seen some of that in the news lately where if you don't understand each part of the supply chain, including the AI that's inside, I like to call it the Gen AIification. So it's the Gen AIification of software. Every software from ServiceNow to Pega to Salesforce to Workday, all the cloud service providers, Snowflake, Databricks, they all now have AI inside to provide a conversational interface to the data. And with that, all the more reason the regulators are scrutinizing and ensuring that all of those items along that life cycle are absolutely explainable and are able to be scrutinized so that the black box, if you will, does not create issues for the regulators.
Yeah, it's interesting that with as a old school programmer, I was always used to, deterministic sort of programming. Like you tell it what to do and it does it. And now with generative AI, it's very probabilistic, right? It's, gave this answer today, but give a different answer tomorrow. You switch your model, you're going to get another really different answer. A lot of testing on your model is really important, so you understand sort of the range of behaviors, understanding how it was trained and getting that sort of certification for how the model was developed in the past. With setting up guardrails, there are technical systems like there's Amazon Bedrock guardrails that you can set up that gives you a whole range of different ways of restricting both the prompt coming in to the LLM and the response coming back out. So you could set up, basically word filters. Don't allow these words in, don't allow these kinds of words out. You can set up topic filters. Don't talk about this thing. Actually, it's funny, I was just doing a test and you set up a topic filter by giving it a definition of what you do, you don't want it to talk about. And then you give it some examples. And I, did, don't mention the war, that faulty towers, skit. And amazingly, it actually understood that. And it's like, oh, it would not make references to certain things about World War II. I was like, oh, okay. And had it write a little skit on, pretending it was faulty towers characters, and it actually did that. But you can also do things like, this is relatively new, or I think it's called automated reasoning, where you can give the LLM your policy documents that spell out the do's and don'ts of what it, this is allowed and this is what it's not allowed to do. So for example, it could be just your vacation policy information. You just enter that into the large language model, it interprets it, and will actually come up with, and will write them out for you, very clear rules that it's going to follow. And then when it is generating a response, it's going to follow those rules, and you can go and audit that. And they look at that as being a more deterministic way of being able to filter and control the responses of your LLM. So that's a nicer sort of way of getting more control over what this LLM is doing. So I think this keeps evolving. I think more and more abilities are going to keep emerging for controlling and understanding what the LLM does.
Yeah, those back to the book Robots and Empire in the three laws of robots, right?
Yeah, actually, people have been talking about creating like constitutional AI, where you give it the principles that it should follow, which in a lot of ways can be done both when you train the model or just as prompt engineering afterwards. But yeah, it's basically you're getting to like the three laws of robotics, like you will not allow a human to be harmed, things like this.
I do think that with those kinds of principles, it's really important, but it's also important to make sure that those principles are appropriate to your use case. In some of our very earliest experiments with generative models, the partners we were working with were horrified by the content that we gave them and said, like, oh, this content is very violent. Are you sure? Can you give us less violent content to work with? And we said, it's the news. News is often violent. And if you can't handle that, then that's going to be a problem. So it's important that when we think about these kinds of guardrails, that they're appropriate to the use case and the audience, so that we're not overly constricting and kind of getting in the way of the business use case.
Yeah, and to the point about guidelines and guardrails, I know AP publishes guidelines on how you use Gen AI in your whole workflow, and it's available out to the public to review. Can you speak a little bit about the guidelines and how it fits into what you do on the technology side?
Sure. So first of all, I know I keep saying this, we always, always, always have a human in the loop. Yep. Secondly, and this has been true forever, right? We lean on our standards team. They're incredible people, incredibly thoughtful about what's appropriate and what really how we can align our work with AP's values. And so we really lean on them to say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. How does, what do we need to think about? What do we need to be concerned about? And they've helped us. We've never had a case where we said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. And they said, absolutely not. It's always very collaborative and very positive. We do publish the full AI policy is not out there in the public, but there is quite a bit on ap.org about our AI standards, and also on the blog. There's been quite a few statements as our standards have evolved. And I think that's an important part too. our AI policy and our standards for how we use AI and machine learning solutions have continued to evolve, and we're open to that evolution. So every time we have a new task, a new idea, it's an ongoing collaborative conversation. It's not just this is the policy and you have to adhere to it all times. Obviously, we adhere to it, but it evolves. And so, a great example of that is when we started publishing translations, because it is one thing to say, hey, we're going to use AI to create a shot list. That's not, shot lists are used by video editors and producers at our customers to figure out what's in a video and what they want to use in their own news product. But they're not publishable on their own, right? Like they don't go out to the universe. But a translated story does. It's for consumers. And so when we moved to doing translations, we had to be really clear about how we communicated to our customers. Our translations all have an editor's note that says, like, hey, this was initially translated by AI and then edited by a human editor. And it's really important that we find ways to communicate to people, I would say at all stages, about how AI was used in the production of content.
Just one follow on that in terms of a technique that it's not a new one, but it's becoming more prevalent around the transparency of the models. So this notion of a model card. So now the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is not a perfect organization, but they do require the nutrition labels on the back, right? And also the warnings. And so I think we're moving more towards that, where just what you said triggered that thought, because we'll have to have more disclosure and disclaimers around the usage of the models. And so the model card effectively will be the nutrition label for the model, say, this is what the intended use is, this is what the expectations is. And then there's a really important concept in terms of model drift, right? Mm-hmm. Where the certification that was done at one time, as the data changes or the circumstance changes, the model performance will degrade. And so there needs to be constant monitoring around that. So model cards to describe the intended usage, especially in this agentic world where, like I described before, we're going to have these agentic places where you can download the agents from these marketplaces. And you could literally see it's like an API to a library call, but you have to adhere to the model definition. And so that with human in the loop, along with the laws that you described earlier, I think that some of those are the safeguards in terms of the content.
Just to be a naysayer, sorry about this. I know a big issue with human in the loop is about scalability. And a lot of publishers are addressing this because one of the values of AI is to be able to scale without constantly having someone in the loop at all times. And a good example, and I was talking to Johns Hopkins University about this, where they are using generative AI for making alt text to meet accessibility standards, because they can't go back to their entire archive and have a human review all of the alt text that's being created by the generative AI. They are spot checking, and they're finding that the results are good enough that they don't have to have a human in the loop for all of that alternative text being created. But it is an example where, okay, we have to figure out what the right balance is between getting the person in the loop and also taking advantage of the scalability that the generative AI is offering.
That's a good segue into like the next part of what we'd like to discuss, is really about the consumption of the data that AI produces, right? And how are people interacting with these systems? Social media changed the way people are interacting with news, right? How people are searching for things on the web is very different these days. So what are some of your thoughts and what you're seeing happening now as people are changing their products with AI and augmenting them?
At AP, we launched an AI-driven search experience in 2023 on our AP Newsroom portal, which is our B2B portal where journalists will come to find news content. And that, our archives, especially our photo and video archives, go back over 100 years. We are kind of unique in that respect. And so that means that when you go back 100 years, the quality and quantity of descriptive metadata available for a lot of those assets is variable, appropriate to the time. And it often, more often than not, describes the news story that was being illustrated by the content, not the actual content itself. And that's really a challenge for us, because when you're trying to find a photo for a book or a clip for a documentary, it doesn't really matter what the news story was in that moment. You just want a photo of, John Paul II, right? You just need a photo of him in a white robe. And so, we've found that our AI-driven visual search experience really helped our customers to more quickly identify the assets that would most readily address their need, without having to sort of think about, okay, what news events were happening in the early 70s that might include a photo that's appropriate to my need, right? It really helped them kind of skip to that next level. We've also just a few weeks ago launched an AI-driven browse experience that helps our customers. It organizes content into storylines, for the top stories of the day, and then breaks it down into sort of different angles on that story. So it helps our customers to find new ways to tell those top stories of the day in their own news products that are a little different. And so these types of AI solutions, they're not creating new content, but they are helping our customers find and address their own needs. And so it's a little bit different, the policy around it's a little different. But having said all of that, what we've heard and what we've seen in our data is that lexical and metadata-driven search is still incredibly important for a huge percentage of our use cases, and that it's not going away. It's not going anywhere. If anything, we see them as a yes and, as a complement, not as competitive solutions.
Yeah, definitely. Enhanced search has become really important, and hybrid search, really, which is often the case, because you'll get better results depending on the use case, whether it's lexical or whether it's semantic. It does often come up now that people are not going back to the original source. They are taking the summary that the AI is generating, which is something I think publishers need to start thinking about. Another thing I think more and more, and especially you were talking about agentic sort of marketplaces, right? If publishers need, I think, to start thinking about, how can I deliver information and tools not to people, but to agents, to AI agents? Because I think that's going to be a big shift in what the market is going to be demanding, in another way of monetizing and using your content. And so I think it's really looking at, what are the sort of use cases, that ways that people use your information, and what sort of tools that you, as experts about your content, would you think people actually need, and that agents would really need, and build those tools and make those available as a license, as a subscription model. Maybe that's going to be an MPC server that people can access. Maybe it's an API. Maybe it's an agent itself that can be accessed through an API. I think that's the thing to start thinking about, where you're going to deliver value.
Yeah, just a point on that in terms of what you mentioned around the data creation. So there's this notion of synthetic data, which this is why hallucinations are so important to get under control, because we now have synthetic data feeding generative capabilities that's creating more synthetic data. And so ultimately, where is the truth? And so come back to what I was talking about at the very beginning in terms of trust, right? So being able to trust what's published. And you mentioned social media before, and I think most would agree that some of the social media has at least created more segmentation in terms of thoughts, where you could get into these echo chambers. And so, in one way or the other, we're not judging either way, but I think this whole notion of synthetic data and controlling the hallucinations at the source is extremely important.
Yeah, and that's actually I mean, I think that's why publishers' content is so valuable, right? If models are only consuming the synthetic content created by other models, you get model collapse, right? Where everything sort of starts, all the images start looking like the same thing, right? All the text just blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. It is that fresh infusion of human insight and value that is really where the value is, right? And so I think a lot of publishers are saying, well, can we syndicate our content? Can we get licensing deals to train models? And maybe because you hear some big deals being made, but honestly, I think that's more of an exception. And I think it is right. Create that API, create that MPC server, create those sets of tools that other agents can consume where, right, that's getting your truth out there that can be used by other agents and models, and you're holding on to that value. Unless they can change the attribution model and somehow capture this data really came from this publisher to train this model, and when the model generates an answer, you can send money back to that content creator. But right now, that technology isn't there.
Yeah, I think we haven't talked about yet this whole notion of the legal aspects, right? Also, and the very first thing that happened with OpenAI, as everybody knows and saw, was copyright law. And so that gets to exactly what you're talking about in terms of what is the truth, source of truth. But you raised an interesting point in terms of just like conforming to what's already there. What will be again, this is something out there we shouldn't shy away from. What is the role of humans, as we go forward in this stuff where that still, at least it seems in the next decade or this decade, this decade ending, that in 2030, that human brains will still be more advanced than the synthetic AI.
Yeah, it's a good point about the legality of all this. And it is kind of a slippery slope right now. Every area in the world are, the laws are evolving. There's different standards here in the United States. As generated content is not copyrightable, right? It has to be modified to a certain extent. So how, that extra content and the training and all these aspects play a big part into it. So also in licensing came up, and that was an interesting topic too, as I was speaking with a friend recently that, when you traditionally license content, it's around a topical area and of interest. But now licensing content for AI is quite different, right? There's people just looking for images that contain smoke in it, right? Or different types of content or, certain biases. Are you seeing new products in that way and being able to offer content and new packages based off of those needs?
Well, like I was saying, reuse of assets has always been of great interest to publishers, and a big blocker has been understanding the rights attached to those. That's why I was very impressed where Condé Nast had been working with AWS to build this LLM basically driven process for clearing assets for reuse. So in fact, I was talking to Christopher O'Donnell, and he was the SVP for Business Affairs at Condé, and he'd said he'd always envisioned this sort of like Apple iTunes store or an AWS marketplace or really an Amazon marketplace for content, where anyone could go and just pick the content they want or the data sets that they want, and just you've got it, and you can use it for maybe you're training a model, maybe you're using it as background for a story. This I think becomes more and more possible with the use of large language models and agents, especially to handle the transactions. So I think that that's one place where publishers can start using content in a new way and using LLMs to help clear those rights.
Yeah. So I think, AP has always been very aggressive in defending our intellectual property and our rights to our content, and in ensuring that our partners are appropriately remunerated for their content. And we did one of the earliest deals, I think, in selling content to AI companies that for training, and really demonstrating how valuable authoritative news material is for training. And so we've been been really leading the market in that. And I think it's an ongoing and absolutely critical thing. And when we've done deals for huge swaths of content. We've also worked with partners who really wanted a focused content set to train a specific model for a specific task, and we're happy to partner with companies that want to that see the value of our content and want to use it in their own products. And I think that gets to the metadata question, and when we do look back across our archive, like I said, the metadata varies quite widely when you're going back decades, but it takes the metadata itself. It takes expertise and domain knowledge in what that metadata means and meant in the past, to really be able, and in the corpus itself and in what's in the archive, to be able to put together those products. And so it's our metadata, it's our knowledge of our content and our metadata, and it is we use our taxonomies and ontologies to help us to guide those queries and to understand the topic areas themselves, how different things relate to each other today, how they related to each other in the 80s and the 70s and the 30s, and to make sure that we're able to give customers the best experience in receiving content from us.
So I was going to jump in. This is a little bit off topic, but it does raise the question about when content or an asset gets separated from its metadata and it escapes out and people are reusing it. And I think that starts to get to these questions of we need better solutions for content provenance and content integrity. Anyway, I've been doing a lot of work with things like the C2PA to try to track provenance, but of course that can get stripped out. But are there other ways of being able to recognize content, whether it's textual content or whether it's a visual or video or audio, of being able to hash that in some way and match it back to an original source, which can start to get to, this content looks like it actually came from this origin. Let the legal games begin, et cetera, et cetera.
That's just another point on this notion of model drift, right? Where if you separate the content from the description of the content and the metadata, then all bets are off. Just one point from the banking space in terms of the data that they use. A lot of banks now are building what they're calling kind of data vaults or data repositories to, for example, banks sell credit cards and bank accounts and wealth accounts and things of that nature. And so the marketing of those, so in terms of being super attuned to personalization of the marketing and using all the transaction data that they own, I mean, they capture it as this notion of data exhaust, right? And they then leverage that to be able to be very targeted in their marketing. And then in some cases, they're selling that as a service. So that's the use in the banks.
Really interesting. So to the point with the banks and the point with the content and keeping the metadata in context, a strong data management foundation is really important to all this. Can you speak to some of the standards that you put in place, or you were talking a little bit about taxonomies and ontologies for organizing data. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Maybe we'll just start off in terms of what I'm seeing. I talked about data swamps before. At least in banking, still there's a lot of mainframes out there, and a lot of these banks are starting to think about moving off the mainframe into the cloud. So, for example, that would be great for your workloads, of course, but a lot of migrations are going on from legacy capabilities, and those are going to go on for a few more years in terms of just establishing the clean data foundation. That then it is interesting because as the technology from Gen AI agentic and the next wave gets more advanced. So, for example, there is going to be IBM's now coming out with Gen AI in the mainframe, right? And so that'll be an interesting dynamic. in terms of can the capabilities just go after the data that's in place wherever it is today, as long as it has the right access rights. So that's something that's evolving now, but we're seeing a lot of migrations to the modernization capabilities around the banks.
Yeah, I think that everyone knows, right? Data, content, it needs to all be accessible, and you want to be able to break down all of the data silos and having, because that is what's powering your ability to do traditional AI, ML, and generative AI, right? You need access to that content and to metadata and to transactional and other data itself in order to drive good model outcomes. Putting things in the cloud certainly helps. It breaks down the silos. Everything is now accessible over API. And that is the thing that gets you into being able to pull any content, any data from any source, because you've got an API. You need to have good privacy tools to be able to make sure that it's only authorized users accessing the right data. You need to know where the data is stored to meet any kind of privacy or data regulations for that specific region. So all of these things are very important to think about. If you're going to build a relational database, use one that can be scaled out quite a lot, like with Amazon RDS. If you're going to really have analytics, think about data warehouse like Redshift, where it can be information acquired and analyzed very quickly. If you want to keep your data long term, then think about building out a data lake, right? And also making sure you have good data governance structures in place so you know where all your data is. You can perhaps define what your schemas are going to be, whether it's like schema on read when you're pulling things out of a data lake, et cetera, et cetera. So you really have to think about getting your data house in order and creating those pipelines to move data into it and pull the data back out.
Yeah. So we have a long history of partnering with our peers across the industry in IPTC on standards for news content metadata, for how news is transmitted and is delivered. I mean, going back to Morse code over wire, and hexadecimal material over satellite. And that partnership has continued, and I think it really benefits all of us across the industry to have standards around how we deliver and transmit our content so that our customers can more readily and easily use it. Within our own environments, we have obviously strong systems in place to keep content in context of its metadata. This is not an issue internally, and it's not an issue at distribution. But to your point about provenance and authenticity, there's a lot of concern about generated or edited images and video, and that is absolutely a problem that we need to continue to address. But misinformation, it can be as simple as just putting a different caption under the photo. You don't have to edit the image at all, because very, 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 very few people are going to go look at the embedded metadata in the image to figure out that, oh, actually, this is not, in fact, where or when this caption says it is. So I think that's the piece, like that piece of the misinformation puzzle is something that we're really not addressing yet in CGPA. And I think that's really the crisis. I know everyone's really concerned about generated images. I am too, but it's so easy to just put a misleading caption, and don't do it. It's so easy to put a misleading caption into a photo. And that is, to me, that is the crisis that we need to be dealing with.
Yeah, this really points back that context is really important as well, right? It's not about the information or that image on its own or that slice of metadata that you see, but where does it sit in the bigger picture and where does it sit within your corpus of data? And part of this too, I think we were talking about a lot of the foundational elements and managing and whatnot. And those are traditionally projects that were hard to fund back in the day. And now we have new ways and new products that we can build on top of it where we can focus on this data management side of things. So just kind of closing out now is any final thoughts on what you would say for somebody just getting their feet wet, and what should you look at and how should you just start?
Just start.
Yeah.
Yeah, just and I would jump and say, don't look at it as a technology problem. Look at it as a business case. What is my real business use case I am trying to address? And then start thinking, okay, if I don't have to have a person reading every piece of content or looking at every image, how does that change my business case? How does that make my business more affordable or create the opportunity for different products? Or you're thinking, oh, what if I'm selling to an agent, an AI agent? What sort of data or information kind of tooling could I offer? I think it's really just a slight shift in mindset, but it's not so much technology driven. Still focus on your core mission, but new possibilities.
I think it's people, process, and technology. And we published a paper called Workforce, and Workers, which talks about the actual work. So if you're, again, as I described earlier, if you're looking at tasks and roles across the organization, so there's tasks that can be automated with bots. We don't see whole roles yet being affected. And so if you have these partial roles with tasks, what's the workforce look like? I mean, so talent is a major thing. And I think you said it right, which in terms of just start, because you have to experiment with it such that the organization, the overall organization's conversancy with the capabilities are new, and it's moving so fast. And at least still, we're not a deep fake up here. So
Not yet. I do think just start, but I would say that you're right. Looking at what the business value is to your organization, we are absolutely going to have a human look at every piece of content, always. But the business value for us is empowering those people to do more of what they're really good at, right? So it doesn't have to be like the business value. You need to make sure that your use case aligns with the business value, right? Like figuring that out is number one. And then, just start. We ran tons and tons of content. And in order to be able to identify where the models were going to go wrong, and that enabled us to figure out what we needed to fine tune, to figure out where we needed an agent, to figure out where we needed a guardrail so that we were able to get those solutions to market. But if we had started from like, okay, what are all of the things we're going to need? We would never have moved forward. So you just have to do something. And then with the full understanding that it might be terrible at first, and that's totally fine. You have to be ready to fail.
Well, thanks, everyone. I'd like to open it up to some questions in the audience now. Any questions?
it's crystal clear.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks for joining us today. You're going to hear a lot more presentations on this matter and the strong data foundation. I'd just like to thank the three of our guests here for taking the time out of their day for coming and sharing.
Thank you.
Have a good day.